welcome back. Time for another episode of Revenue Optimization Radio. Brought to you today by the good folks, Upland Altify, the sales transformation company.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Revenue Optimization Radio. This weekend, we have a bona fide friend of Upland Software and Upland Altify on the show, Mr. Tim Reisterer, the Chief Strategy Officer at Corporate Visions. Tim, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So Tim is the co-author of the new book, The Expansion Sale, 4 Must-Win Conversations to Keep and Grow Your Customers. Today, we're going to delve into one of the 4 key pillars of the book, which is how to get your customers to buy more of your stuff and how to expand in an existing customer. But before we dip into the meat of that, Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Corporate Visions.
Sure, Sean. So I'm the Chief Strategy Officer, which is a great title. It means you get to be in charge of a lot of things, but not take full responsibility for anything. So the reality is I'm involved in the research that we do. So we do research in the area of decision science, neuroscience, behavioral economics, social psychology. I like to call them the invisible forces that shape how humans, and B2B buyers are humans, how humans frame value and make choices. And then we parlay that into our work with our customers. So what do? We help build messages and storylines, put those messages and stories into content assets, whether that's demand gen content or sales enablement content, and then teach skills to deliver those stories. So we like to think of ourselves as a customer conversation company, that point where all the good things you've done as a company to get ready to sell something, now somebody's lips have to move and make that happen in order for a customer to say yes. So that's our job, is we equip and enable those whose lips are moving in front of a customer.
Where are you based? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So our company is super virtual. So I get to command post all this from outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the mecca of customer messaging. So that's where I'm located. The company is all over the globe. We serve and deliver content in 15 languages. When we've delivered and traveled in 65 countries on average in a given year, we train and enable up to 30,000 sellers every year.
For me, one of the best parts about this job and hosting this podcast is I get to review and read a lot of great material and a lot of great books, and I really enjoyed The Expansion Sale. The foundation of this book really, for me, was built on status quo bias. For our listeners, what does this mean and why is it so crucial in the context of expanding your footprint in an account?
So status quo bias is a piece of science that, as I mentioned, we delve into the sciences of how humans make decisions. Status quo bias simply says people are generally reluctant to change their mind. They want to exist in and maintain and sustain their current status quo until some sort of force is acted on it in such a way that they believe their status quo is no longer safe. And for years, I think we've all kind of known that in order to win new business, you had to disrupt, defeat, otherwise dislodge status quo bias so that you could replace yourself in the position that maybe someone else or the incumbent held. And so you had to disrupt and defeat status quo bias. And what we started to wonder is, with so much recurring revenue and subscription and licensing and SaaS-oriented business, is that moment when you need to keep that business and expand that business the same? Should you be using such disruptive, provocative, challenging, insightful, sort of defeat status quo bias approaches? Turns out you don't. And now it sounds obvious when I say that now, but I think we had also bought into the hype that when we started doing research with existing customers, we discovered that you don't want to disrupt status quo bias when you're the status quo bias.
And I think, for me, I think it was interesting when I read the book first. What I expected from the book, I think, was more conversation specifically around sales. But this is as much a marketing book as it is a sales book, which is probably, as a product marketeer, why I enjoyed it so much. One of the things that I pulled out from it was that 80% of companies in one of the surveys that you did, they spend 70% of their sales and marketing budget on demand gen, content, sales enablement. And that only leaves about 30% for retention and expansion. Tell us why, based on your research, this is such a lost opportunity for businesses.
There's just an allure about new logos and going after new business, and it is harder. So it probably does cost a little bit more. So we'll be honest with that. But when you look at anybody's, in most mature companies, and you look at their revenue and their growth opportunities, 80% of it on average comes from existing customers. I stood in front of one of the largest software companies. In fact, the largest SaaS company sales kickoff this year, they held up our book and said, listen, literally 80% of our growth in our business this year is going to come from existing customers, selling them more of what we have. That's our best opportunity. And that's what this book is about. That's why this book is so important, especially now when new logo work is hard and getting harder, or at least very slow and suspect. Existing customers are the opportunity for you, and you need to know there's a different way to approach them than how you approach new logos.
And I mean, from a messaging perspective, I thought was interesting as well. The role of the CSM and upselling to customers, I think, is a really nuanced one. In the book, you say that CSMs pride themselves on delighting the customer, but they also need to make sure that the customer is retained. Talk to me about the importance in the why evolve message model that forms such a large part of this book.
So CSM, it's interesting. It's sort of like that category, customer success management category, is just sort of exploded. It feels like overnight, but I think it's the reason, like this book is timely as companies are realizing this motion is timely, the customer success management motion. And I think initially customer success was if we ensure adoption, if we manage utilization and report on some metrics and some impact, customers will just renew and buy more from us. It was really if a customer sat score is right, all goodness will follow. And what we've discovered is that's not necessarily true. Like your NPS score can be great all up until the time they leave you, because there's all kinds of other things that work there. So the renewal is important, but throughout the comfortable confines of a contract, the opportunity is really to introduce new things. And the question was really begged in the upgrade, upsell, add-on sale motion. In that motion, do you then bring a disruptive story because it's something new, or do you need to treat that differently? And what we found out again is you actually need to treat that differently, that when you are the status quo bias, your job is actually to lean into that. Politicians know this. It's called incumbent advantage. The incumbent always has an advantage. You need to leverage your advantage. There's business impact that you've had. There's results that you've had. There's demonstrated working relationship and partnership that you have. There's mutual investment and effort that's been made. So there's all this goodness and all of this positive momentum and all of this, as scientists sometimes call sunk cost, that you need to lean into that. If you go out and tell the same story as your competitors, this disruptive story, when you have all of this that you could be leveraging, you've given up that incumbent advantage. So the Why Evolve story kind of grew out of that idea. Leverage your incumbent advantage to talk about new stuff. Don't just lead with new stuff.
And I think that's where a lot of the value gets driven. And you talk about CSM as value communicators in the business. What can they do differently when they're having those type of conversations with the customer? Once you get past the sign stage, you're in that middle of the 3-year period in a normal SaaS construct. How can they deliver that value in a more relevant way to the customer, and one that's going to lean into that status quo bias that you talked about?
Every time we did studies in the area of the expansion sale, there were really multiple studies, but 4 main areas. One was just the renewal story. We like to call that the why stay. The price increase story, we call that why pay more. And we're talking a little bit here about the why evolve story. Why should I do more with you? And another fun one was why forgive, that how do you apologize after a service problem? But the why evolve one's getting most of the attention, this idea of upgrade, add-on, upsell, whether you're a company that's maybe taking somebody from on-premise to the cloud, or you're trying to move them from version 2 to 10 because they're lagging and all your advances are on the modern version, or you're trying to sell adjacencies, add-on sales, and get a bigger share of wallet. In the existing customer scenario, we discovered that every time you try to tell an upgrade, add-on sort of story, cross-sell, upsell, you anchor the customer on the positive results that you've achieved together, that it seems to create sort of a halo effect for the rest of the conversation. And like I said, it creates that differentiation between you and any of your competitors who are trying to sneak in there and get this same piece of the pie. So documenting business results, and we talk about doing that on 3 levels. We call it the triple metric. So the first thing you need to do in your story is identify the project level value. That's the first level of the triple metric, project level, and then how that rolls up to the department level. So in the project, these good things have happened. This is how that's impacted the department or the business unit. And then if the business unit does this well, this is what that means to the rest of the organization. And you sort of ladder it up through a triple metric. And opening every existing customer conversation with some measurements of business impact and outcomes and value that's been achieved is the only way to win more upsells and add-on sales. It's more effective than our natural inkling, which is let's lead with the new stuff because we're trying to introduce them to the new stuff. So you soften, you anchor, and you create a halo for the rest of your story by documenting results and identifying the mutual investment and effort that you've made. Both companies have spent time onboarding and integrating systems, process change, learning new nomenclature. There's a lot of effort and investment that you've mutually made together, both time and money. And so you want to sort of document that before you launch into that upgrade story.
That's what I think when you look at companies then who position the product. So the natural inclination for sales or for CSM and people in an existing customer scenario is show them the new release, show them the new demo of what we've got coming. But what you found in the book and from the studies that you did with a lot of researchers in the UK and elsewhere is that leading with the product is always less effective than leading with those decision metrics like you talked about there. How can companies shift the mindset, apart from reading this book, how can companies shift their mindset moving away from that heavily product-led upsell or expand story?
Yeah, I think if you just think of the phrase context matters. So if you have something new, and especially if you're on the product marketing side of the business, you tell the new story because it's new, and you tell the differentiation story because these are the unique selling propositions. But you have to literally, I think, imagine these as completely separate sales funnels. Think of one funnel needing to tell that story about that new thing in a way that is new, flashy, highly contrasting, and challenging, provocative, and disruptive. And that's for the new acquisition funnel. Now think of this other funnel, and think of it as a bigger funnel. This same product needs to be launched into the installed base, but the story needs to be contextualized to the existing customer scenario and experience that they have with you, what they're doing today and how this fits and what you've accomplished and what they should have been experiencing and seeing already that this adds to incrementally. With existing customers, it's more about continuing momentum, not disrupting and not surprising. So you just have to think of, as a company, there are two situations or two contexts for which you must position each new thing. And the one needs to be highly provocative and the other one needs to be more evolutionary.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously an area that even companies, our own company, we would struggle with, where you are trying to have those two tracks of how you position your products. I think before we take a break here, let's dip into the why evolve message model. Can you give us a brief outline of the 5 stages, and then we'll get into it a little bit deeper after the break?
Yeah, so it's like a choreography. There's a framework we tested, and it starts with this idea of documenting results and the investment and effort. Like I said, anchoring it in that idea. Here's what's been accomplished. But with your existing customer, you have an opportunity because you've done some work inside and you work with others like them. So the next move after document results is to introduce evolving or emerging trends, not surprising, disruptive. Oh, didn't see that coming. Evolving trends, and get them thinking about what else they should consider. And then you get to share hard truths. The third move is hard truths. Because of your perspective as an internal partner and your expertise as working with other companies like them externally, you bring the internal and external perspective and say, here's some missed opportunities you might be facing. And then the fourth and the fifth moves are, here's the risk of not making change, here's the upside of making change. And as a consultative partner, you share both. And here's what it looks like if you don't, here's what it looks like if you do. And in the contrast between those two stories, your customer perceives the value of what you're talking about. So we can get into that in more depth, but those are the 5 moves. Document results, introduce evolving, emerging trends, share hard truths, explain the risk of no change, and describe the value of change.
Okay, well, we look forward to getting into those hard truths and all the other sections once we take a break here and pay some bills. Tim Reisterer, Chief Strategy Officer from Corporate Visions. We'll be right back.
We live in a subscription economy. You're only as successful as your customers, and that requires a mindset shift from what's our strategy for the customer to what's our customer's strategy and how can we help. Focusing on your customers' needs and providing value in every interaction is critical to building long-term relationships and sustained sales success. The challenge for most sales leaders and their teams is their sales process doesn't match how customers buy in today's digital world. Sustained growth and sales execution are impossible because the revenue team isn't aligned with consistent process and methodology to understand their customers' people and their problems. Altify's customer revenue optimization solutions activates the entire revenue team with a combination of strategy, methodology, and applications to help companies deliver more value to their customers. The result is increased sales velocity, improved win rates, and increased customer satisfaction. With a CRO strategy, now you can effectively collaborate across the entire revenue team to win new business and unlock more cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Built natively on the Salesforce platform, Altify helps revenue leaders and their teams achieve sustained revenue growth and sales success. Visit Altify.com today to see how they help accelerate sales performance for some of the world's best sales teams, including Autodesk, Comcast, GE, Honeywell, Salesforce, Tableau, and United Health Group.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Revenue Optimization Radio. I'm here with Tim Reisterer, the Chief Strategy Officer of Corporate Visions. We're discussing his great new book, The Expansion Sale. And speaking of which, Tim has kindly offered one of our listeners the chance to get a free copy of The Expansion Sale. So the first person to find Tim on LinkedIn, drop him an email and tell him that they were listening to and heard about the expansion sale on the podcast Revenue Optimization Radio from Untitled. He will send you a copy of that book. So thank you very much for that, Tim. Much appreciated.
Yeah, good luck.
Before the break, we talked very briefly about the 5 stages of the Why Evolve message model. Let's dip into that a little bit deeper. Can we go back into the first stage of that model, please, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure. In every model, basically, of the expansion sale, we discovered that you need to anchor positively to create a halo for the rest of the conversation by documenting results. And this is interesting because it sounds obvious, but then when you talk to companies about, okay, let's document some results, they really struggle. And this is an area that companies need to get better at. And they need to identify the results, the impact, the progress made to date. Nobody likes to step in front of momentum. And what we discovered is you don't even have to show 100%. If you set a goal, you don't have to even get to 100% a goal. In all of our studies, we made sure that the goal was achieved only about 50%. We didn't want to make the renewal or the upgrade a slam dunk. We just said, hey, the goal was this. You've achieved about 50% so far. And so the key for you is to identify the business impact that your solution is having for the customer and identify and agree on what sort of things you're measuring. And as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, there are really, we call it a triple metric, 3 areas you want to measure: the project goals, the impact on the department or business unit's goals, and then how that rolls up to the organization's goals. Because ultimately you really want to engage executives and decision makers in this. So you want to make sure that the results you're showing and the impact you're having is something they can identify with. And then just a touch of mentioning, recapping the kind of investment and effort both sides have made in making this a reality. Because there's a thing in science called sunk cost fallacy. It's called a fallacy because sunk cost isn't real, but yet because everybody believes in sunk cost, then I would argue it is real. It's not a fallacy. And that is that if we've put this much time and effort into it, why would I want to go through that again and have to maybe reorganize the organization and go through process and change management and find new budget and onboard all over again? So reinforcing status quo bias means to reinforce the impact you're having, the outcomes and the value you're providing, and recap quickly the investment and effort they're making. And so that's move number 1, as then you pivot to talk about the upgrade or upsell.
And I think before we get into my favorite step of the model, which is sharing hard truths, talk to me about highlighting evolving pressures in the business.
Yeah, so there's the opportunity is that you don't want to now spring total surprises on them. What we've discovered is one of the reasons that these models work so well in the expansion sale is that disruptive and provocative or challenging insights only serve to cause your customer to step back and go, wow, if that much change is necessary and that much newness has to happen, now's maybe a good time to evaluate all my options. Why should I just assume my incumbent is the best provider of this, especially if my incumbent is telling me I've got to do this much different and do this much changing. So the idea is when you're status quo bias, don't disrupt status quo bias. So that's one of the reasons these models work. And so when we talk about evolving trends, you want people to realize they made a good decision, the best decision they possibly could when they did, especially because they chose you. But the next thing you want to talk about is, here's what's happening since then. Here are the trends in the marketplace. Here are the emerging or evolving challenges in the marketplace. Here are some new opportunities. These things have happened since you made this previous decision with us. And so the idea is you want to be consultative, but after you've let them know you've had some impact for them. And you have this unique opportunity as an internal provider and someone who helps other companies like them. So you have an external purview as well, that you can now say, hey, part of my job is to give you a news update on what's going on in the industry competitively, in the market in terms of trends and issues, and in the solution category that we're talking about.
You want to become that trusted partner. Like you say, you want to be able to give guidance to your customer. Talk to me about sharing hard truths to your customer, because this is not easy, this section here.
No, and here's what we did discover. The one thing that works well when you're trying to win new business is you have to make them feel their status quo is unsafe. It's a very emotional need that humans have, that if I'm going to do something different, I have to believe that what I'm doing today is going to create a loss or a cost to me. And so the idea now with an existing customer and an upgrade is you still need a little bit of that emotional nudge. And sharing hard truths comes off of this consultative moment where you share your observations and you clarify and pinpoint and identify for them these evolving trends. And now you say, based on my experience working with you, and working inside your company and seeing what we've been seeing, and our experience as an organization working with other companies like you, here's how you are or aren't ready to handle these trends or changes or capitalize on these new potential opportunities. Share hard truths is an emotional moment that is now couched in your experiences with them and expertise, but it's really an emotional moment designed to begin to get them to think about making some changes in other parts of their business. It's a necessary part of decision making that nobody is going to be persuaded to change unless there's a little bit of uncertainty about what they're currently doing. And sharing hard truths is that moment where you create a little bit of uncertainty about these other areas that you would like to work with them in.
And that flows into the risk of not changing and how to emphasize the potential risks in them not evolving with you and them not taking additional product, additional upsells. Talk to me about why the risk of no change is important in this model.
Yeah, as I was saying, the idea of there's a scientific principle called loss aversion. And it's coupled with another one called risk seeking. Most people are risk averse, and you want them to seek a little risk, meaning make some change. And in order for them to seek risk, they are more likely to do that in order to avoid a loss than they are to get a gain. And so before you can tell them how good your stuff is, you have to let them know and be very consultative and let them know, if you don't make the changes, if you don't respond to these trends, these are the problems that might crop up. These are the goals that might go unmet, or these are the opportunities you won't be able to take advantage of. So the risk of no change is, here's the cost or loss of staying the same. It's a necessary piece of the story puzzle that people are not very comfortable with. But in human decision-making, these emotional moments are necessary.
And it was nice to see in the book, actually, the reference to Daniel Kahneman and the work that he's done in this particular area, that people are twice as likely to want to avoid a loss than they are to make a gain. So I think that's a really important part of the model. The final one is the upside opportunity, the final piece of the Why Evolve model. Take us through that one.
So I think of this as like now the correlative, like here's the risk of no change. Now here's the upside of change. And so sometimes in our model, it looks very linear, but I like to think of it as you get to a fork in the road to the customer and you're saying, here are the hard truths. Now here's what the risk of not changing is, and here's the upside of making this change. Because ultimately, people will make the change to avoid loss and avoid risk, but they will explain the change, validate the change, and justify the change to themselves and others based on the gain that they believe they're going to get. So you actually need both. And so you have to quantify and be able to show, and here's the value of making this change as well, so that they can see and they can think about, okay, here's what I look like, here's what I will experience, here's what will not happen or will happen if I don't change, and here's the opposite. If I do change, this will happen, that will happen, the other thing will happen, because humans need that contrast to make a decision. The funny thing about decision making is that literally the perception of value and the perceived need to make a change actually happens when they see contrast between two choices. And so you need to show them both and then sort of share that as, okay, and now here's your decision to be made. Do you want to stick with the current state and experience this? Or what about this future state we're recommending and experience that? Because in that contrast is where value is perceived and decisions are made.
Two roads diverged in the yellow wood. Sorry I couldn't have traveled both. A little bit of Robert Frost on the podcast as well. Tim, one last question. I guess that a lot has changed in the world in the last couple of months since this book was launched. Is there anything you'd write differently or do differently in this publication, knowing all that you know now?
Well, interestingly, it's funny you bring that up. The book launched like February 11th. So parts of the world were already starting to experience the pandemic, and we were just starting to hear about it. And so I'm not sure I would change anything. In fact, I would like to chalk this up to a little bit of a stroke of good timing and good luck, is that...
Prescience.
Yeah, prescience, that seems sort of haughty, but I'll accept it.
I said it. You didn't say it. It's fine.
I would allow you to do that, but I will accept it. The idea here is that what we're seeing now is almost a lockdown on new business. Like there's no new money for new projects really moving very quickly. Maybe some of it is, but not moving very quickly. And so right now, the opportunity has always been 70 to 80% of your business with existing customers. I would argue that now it's probably 90 to 100%. And so the book, The Expansion Sale, was important. I think now it's literally vital because this is where you're going to be hanging on to and hunkering down with those who have got you here and you have gotten them there. That's the motion or the move that everybody's making right now. So I'll accept that timing. And so I wouldn't change a lot because I feel like it's literally dead on with the moment we're in.
And I think it's required reading for 2020 or any year, really. Everybody check it out. The Expansion Sale from Tim Reisterer and the people at Corporate Visions. It's available in all good online bookstores, and also check out corporatevisions.com to learn more about their work and offerings. We appreciate you tuning in. If you like what you hear, give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. You can find me, Sean Broderick, on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Tim, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to Revenue Optimization Radio with your host, Sean Broderick, on the Funnel Radio channel. Podcasts of this live program are available from revenueoptimizationradio.com and all your favorite podcast apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and more. The sponsor for this program has been Upland Altify.